Dive Podcast, straight talk on politics, national security, and America's future. With Robert Johnson and Linda Miller, we cut through the spin, tackle the tough issues, and give you the real story behind today's headlines. Subscribe now and hit the notification bell to stay informed. Today, we're diving deep into a collection of sources that give us a snapshot, really, of the situation in Ukraine right now. We've gathered information touching on, well, quite a range: mobilization efforts, societal reaction, military updates, specific strikes.
And also the bigger picture, right? The international conversation around potential negotiations, Europe's stance, sanctions, that sort of thing.
Exactly. And our mission in this deep dive is pretty clear and focused.
Yeah.
Just lay out what these sources tell us. We're sticking strictly to the information presented, no outside commentary, no analysis from us.
Absolutely. No taking sides. We're just presenting the reports as they are. Think of us as guides walking you through the information itself.
That's the plan. So we'll look at what's being said about, domestic tensions around mobilization, detailed military movements, and strikes as the sources describe them.
And explore those different international viewpoints being reported on the path forward. So, shall we jump right in?
Let's do it. Starting with those rising tensions around mobilization in Ukraine, sources indicate authorities are acknowledging more confrontations.
Yeah, specifically between staff from the military recruitment centers, the TCC, and civilians. It seems to be happening more often.
And there's this method being discussed, often called Busification.
Right, that's the term used. It essentially involves picking up men of conscription age directly from public places, like streets, and then taking them to recruitment centers, often by bus, hence the name.
Okay, and how's that being received?
Well, reports show these methods face heavy criticism from many people, politicians included, but the material points out the authorities' main goal is still ensuring that constant flow of recruits.
So the priority is numbers.
It seems that way, according to these sources. Achieving the recruitment goal is becoming perhaps less constrained by other factors. The sources link this to the difficult situation reported at the front and the mobilization reserve gradually running lower.
And there's talk of potentially lowering the mobilization age. It's 25 now.
Correct. That possibility is raised in the sources. If the conflict goes on, the age might drop. Apparently, some Ukrainian military figures and Western partners are calling for it.
Which would likely make things even more tense around Busification, I imagine.
That's the expectation presented, yes. It would likely intensify the negative feelings.
The sources also mention authorities trying to frame this, like calling Busification a Russian operation.
Yes, describing it as a Russian information psychological operation, or IPSO. There's even talk mentioned about maybe banning social networks where videos of forced mobilization are shared.
Wow. And people critical of mobilization or trying to avoid it are being labeled.
They're being characterized in some narratives as belonging to a party of draft dodgers, contrasting them with the defenders of the fatherland.
So the overall picture is growing tension.
That's the consistent theme across the sources. Tensions are reportedly rising, not just between authorities and the public, but also, it seems, a divide between those pushing for victory and those who might lean towards peace or compromise.
Okay, let's get into some specific incidents and the official responses reported. The ground forces acknowledged videos showing obstruction.
Yes, they reportedly put out statements acknowledging an uptick in videos showing what they call conscious obstruction of TCC activities, and sometimes bystanders are apparently encouraging this resistance.
What's the official line on that obstruction?
An official statement, reportedly via their Telegram channel, emphasized that intentional obstruction threats, pressure, physical force, damaging vehicles is a serious offense.
But they also said TCC work is being restarted to be more transparent.
That's what the statement reportedly said, yes, aiming for more transparent and open operations. But it also stressed that hindering their work has serious national security consequences, especially under martial law. It directly affects the military's ability to function, they say.
And this statement came after specific incidents, Cherkasy and Kremenchuk.
According to the sources, yes, it followed videos of significant conflicts in those cities.
What happened in Cherkasy?
Reports describe TCC staff facing resistance from men and women when they tried to check military registration documents inside an apartment building.
And Kremenchuk.
There, TCC staff reportedly had to take cover in their car after being attacked by some young men. The car ended up significantly damaged, apparently.
And there were arrests.
Following these events, yes. Police in Cherkasy region reportedly announced detaining 3 men and a woman for hooliganism. Official videos are said to show heavily armed special forces making arrests, with authorities claiming civilians provoked the conflict.
What about the Kremenchuk attackers?
The Poltava TCC reportedly stated 2 out of 7 attackers were detained. They claim the attackers used pepper spray and a traumatic pistol, accusing them of serious bodily harm to TCC staff and obstructing military activities.
And there was a mention of potential Russian involvement.
A notable detail from the Poltava TCC's Facebook post, as reported, was the line, "The investigation will determine whether the attackers acted on the orders of Russian special services."
Interesting. Now, what about other perspectives on this? You mentioned analysts.
Right. Political analyst Andrei Zolotarev is cited. He reportedly sees the authorities' reaction as harsh, but also calls it a boomerang effect from what he termed lawless TCC actions.
So he's saying the methods themselves provoke the response.
Essentially, yes. He's quoted suggesting violence isn't surprising in response to these methods, and that mobilization could be done with basic respect, not like catching them like stray dogs.
But others argue the videos themselves are the problem, linking them to Russia.
Exactly. Some sources present that argument that the videos of Busification harm conscription and suggest banning platforms like Telegram and TikTok to stop their spread, attributing it all to Russian IPSO.
But not everyone agrees the current system is working.
No, definitely not. Many voices, including political analyst Yuri Goncharenko, reportedly citing survey data, argue the current conscription model is exhausted. Forced measures just make it worse, they say.
What are the fears reported?
It's not just about fear of death, apparently. It's also fear of falling out of normal life for a long time. Goncharenko mentioned a possible alternative model, allowing people to switch between military service and civilian life.
And what about the effectiveness of those forcibly mobilized?
Some reports, citing soldiers from the armed forces of Ukraine, suggest these individuals are often unmotivated and more likely to desert.
Does Zolotarev think things will change, become more flexible?
He's quoted expressing doubt. He predicts authorities will actually tighten measures further, leading to more resistance, potentially even involving women and teenagers.
Another analyst, Bondarenko, shares that view.
Reportedly, yes. Bondarenko thinks authorities will take a regressive path, but he adds that people's patience is nearing its limit. He sees spontaneous, maybe even organized, protests becoming more likely. His take is that intimidation won't achieve the desired mobilization boost.
Okay, let's shift to this concept mentioned in the sources, the party of draft dodgers. What's that about?
Well, it seems to stem from a figure mentioned last year during a mobilization bill debate. Around 6 million citizens hadn't updated their military registration data.
6 million, that's a huge number.
It is, and according to the sources, this number got picked up on social media and widely interpreted as the number of draft dodgers. And now this group is apparently being looked at from an electoral angle.
As a potential voting bloc.
Exactly. A publicist and serviceman, Pavel Kazarin, reportedly wrote a column titled "Party of Draft Dodgers." He suggests people who see mobilization as a threat could become a real political force.
United by what?
By a desire for self-justification, Kazarin reportedly argues, and a need to feel normal about their stance. He thinks this group is large enough to sustain political careers, even parliamentary factions.
Following who?
Someone who offers them indulgences, as he puts it, and alternative ethics, allowing them to feel like winners. Kazarin believes the fight for this party's votes has already started. He names people like Alexei Arestovich, Dmitry Knapp, Alexei Goncharenko as potentially vying for this support.
So the idea is courting this group means validating their position.
That's the essence of Kazarin's argument presented. Those who court this group grant the flock saving self-justification.
Was there a reaction to this column?
Yes, a response attributed to Deputy Alexei Goncharenko is included. He criticizes mobilization methods himself, but argues Kazarin is also a draft dodger in a warm position, acting on orders. Goncharenko claims such people only care about personal gain.
And Zolotarev warned about this kind of division.
Yes, his comment on the danger of further societal segmentation is brought up again here. Convenient for politicians, he suggests, but risky for a country in conflict.
Okay, let's switch gears to military updates. What are the sources reporting on the ground?
There's news about the reported liquidation of pockets in Ignatovka and Staraya Nikolaevka in the Konstantinovka direction.
And the general assessment?
The assessment presented is that the situation for the armed forces of Ukraine is reportedly getting worse daily. Sources suggest that side understands they cannot hold positions for long.
Any specific strategic moves mentioned?
Reports citing military resources say the Russian army is confidently bypassing Konstantinovka from the west, approaching the city. This is viewed in the sources as a promising strategic plan.
And the significance of that bypass.
The Telegram channel Donbas Reshet is quoted. They state that after Russian forces reportedly block the road between Krasnoyarsk and Konstantinovka, their push towards Dimitrov suggests an intent to drive a wedge between Konstantinovka, Krasnoyarsk, and Dobropoli. These could become targets, key rear centers for the AFU.
What about fortifications, like the Klebon-Bik Reserve?
The material notes that bypassing Konstantinovka from the west could force Ukrainian units to abandon that fortified stronghold. While the terrain is good for defense, the point made is that strongholds are often bypassed strategically to make them irrelevant.
So the goal isn't necessarily direct assault on cities.
Based on the reported Russian advance along the railway line, a conclusion presented is that a logical goal seems to be breaking through defenses without a costly frontal assault on large cities. This could also prevent the AFU from maneuvering their reserves effectively.
All right, let's turn to strikes and reactions. Russia conducted strikes in response to Kyiv's actions.
That's according to the Russian Ministry of Defense, yes. Strikes on military objects in Odessa and other regions were reported as responsive actions.
Any specific major attacks mentioned?
The sources detail a recent massive retaliatory attack. It reportedly damaged or destroyed infrastructure at the Staro-Konstantinov airfield in Kamnitsky region. Also hit, reportedly, were an S-300 command post and a deployment point for AFU units near Odessa.
An S-300? It's an air defense system, right?
Yes, a significant air defense system. And the sources note an observation about missile strikes on the Odessa region becoming more frequent.
Any very recent examples?
Specifically, on May 23rd, strikes in the port of Odessa reportedly destroyed a large military cargo shipment, 100 containers. These apparently held components for unmanned vessels and drones. The sources highlight this was the second such strike in less than a week.
And how did international partners react to this?
It's noted that despite previous strikes on military targets in Odessa, overseas partners are reportedly quite vocal now.
Wow.
For instance, U.S. President Donald Trump's special envoy, Kit Kellogg, is quoted from a social media post on X. It just said, "Stop the fire immediately."
And the sources draw a contrast here.
Yes, they pose a question. Why was the U.S. reportedly silent when Kiev allegedly tried using drones against Russian cities before Victory Day, framed as violating a truce, but agitated now after these strikes?
What's the interpretation offered?
The idea presented is that this powerful strike on Odessa, alongside others across Ukraine, importantly involved the precise destruction of foreign support. Support, the sources suggest, was used to dictate rules in the Black Sea. This is seen as possibly reducing Ukraine's leverage.
And there's speculation about Odessa's future.
Yes, speculation is presented that Western partners might be wondering if Odessa is next. It's potentially referred to as the fifth oblast that warnings were supposedly made about.
Is there any external analysis mentioned on this?
An article in the American publication Military Watch magazine is referenced. It reportedly notes Ukraine keeps getting significant Western weapons, but sea deliveries are more vulnerable to Russian strikes. These deliveries might decrease if predictions about Russia focusing more on Odessa prove true.
Okay, shifting again. Let's look at perspectives on negotiation and the European stance. There's an Italian source mentioned.
Yes, Il Fatto Quotidiano. It reportedly discusses illusions, folly, and hypocrisy around talks and the conflict. It mentions a report that Russia and Ukraine decided to exchange prisoners and start a new round of direct negotiations.
What's Russia's reported position for restarting talks?
Based on the source, it's built on terms previously agreed upon back in 2022, but adjusted for changes since then. Key elements reportedly include Ukraine's neutrality, recognizing the independence of the Russian-speaking population, which the source equates to ending the Donbas fighting, and denazification of the government.
Denazification being defined as?
As the removal of neo-Nazi and extremist leaders who, the source claims, prioritize oligarchs over ordinary Ukrainians.
And Ukraine's position, supported by Eurocrats.
In contrast, Ukraine's reported stance, backed by what the source calls Eurocrats favoring continued war, demands an unconditional ceasefire for at least 30 days. Crucially, this isn't a negotiation point, but a precondition just to start talks.
What are the peace terms reportedly set by Zelensky and partners?
Detailed as no territorial concessions for Russia, no limits on Ukraine's rearmament, confiscation of Russian assets, reparations for war damage, and an international tribunal for Russian leaders.
How does the Italian source assess Ukraine's position?
It calls it unreasonable. It suggests Western authorities know Russia can't accept these terms, especially given what the source describes as Russia's current advantage on the battlefield.
Any historical context offered?
Just the point that wars over existence and territory usually end with borders redrawn on the victor's terms.
And the source sees the truce demand as a stalling tactic.
Yes, the view presented is that Ukraine and Europe intend to use an unconditional truce to buy time. Similar, it suggests, to the Minsk agreements.
Why buy time? What's the perceived goal?
The belief presented is that Europe feels it needs time to rearm itself and Ukraine. It even mentions the possibility of deploying European forces into Ukraine, maybe under the guise of ceasefire control, to eventually confront and defeat Russia openly.
So defense claims are seen as a cover.
The assertion made is that claims of defense and deterrence are hiding a preemptive war allegedly being planned by NATO.
Is there anything specific supporting that claim?
A NATO supreme commander is quoted. "We must defeat the enemy with the first strike, because if we don't, we face 15 years of attrition warfare."
What about Ukraine's ultimate goal, according to this perspective?
The view offered is that Ukraine doesn't want peace with Russia, but rather a constant conflict backed by the United States.
And the U.S. goal?
Not peace, according to this view, but confrontation, specifically between Russia, China, and Europe. The source suggests the U.S. already split Europe and Russia, and now aims to create friction between Russia and China.
How else is Europe reportedly acting? A Baltic blockade?
Yes, reports mention Europe preparing for a naval blockade in the Baltic. The stated aims are to pressure the Russian Navy, stop transit, maybe seize merchant ships from Russian ports.
And Russia's response?
Russia reportedly warned it will defend and protect all commercial shipping affecting its interests in international or its own waters.
Europe also announced more sanctions, package number 17.
That's reported, yes, affecting 189 more merchant vessels. This brings the total number of ships in the so-called shadow fleet assisting Russia to 342, according to the source.
What are the perceived dangers of these sanctions and actions?
The Italian source highlights risks beyond just ineffective export reduction or ships changing flags. It points to increased chances of clashes at sea or in ports, potentially triggering armed conflict as more parties get targeted.
And threats against countries trading with Russia.
Like the U.S., Europe is reportedly threatening sanctions against countries still trading with Russia. The source sees this as just increasing global instability and hostility.
Does the European Commission maintain the sanctions are working?
Reportedly, yes. They insist sanctions are effective and Russia is in crisis. But the source then asks, well, if they work, why are there 17 packages with more planned, and why is the situation in Ukraine reportedly worsening?
How is Russia reacting to the sanctions?
The observation is that Russia ignores sanctions it can get around and watches the effects of secondary sanctions with interest, those now hitting countries like India, China, and others building ties with Russia.
And these secondary sanctions have a boomerang effect.
That's the view presented. Sanctions against these third countries, seen as unrelated to the conflict, boomerang back to her Europe, which the source suggests pleases the United States.
What about the idea of buying time with ceasefires?
The assessment is that Europe's maneuvers for time clash with the reality that time doesn't necessarily favor anyone. 30 days is seen as insignificant, so ideas emerge about periodic, maybe indefinite ceasefire extensions to get the 5 years of preparation Europe supposedly needs.
But 5 years is too long for a surprise attack.
That's the point made. It's too long to guarantee surprise.
And Russia's position on timing?
The view presented is Russia feels it can't concede on time. It faces U.S. pressure, doesn't want to share successes with U.S. President Trump, and wants to stick to principles requiring firmness. A party of so-called hawks is reportedly gaining support, and military leadership wants to prove the issue can be resolved by force quickly.
So Europe thinks Russia will lose, but lacks resources and time.
That's the summary. Europe is reportedly convinced of Russia's defeat, but has limited means and time. Warlike European propaganda is seen as serving short-term lobbies, accelerating decline, and prolonging the war, leading to deaths, destruction, and burying Europe's prosperity dreams for decades.
Okay, finally, let's touch on some reported societal trends within Ukraine itself. There's confirmation of a split regarding mobilization.
Yes, a source cited from within a sociological company confirms that split.
But it's not just a simple war versus draft dodger split.
No, that's presented as an oversimplification. Many people reportedly have complex views. For instance, maybe supporting the war aims, like reaching 1991 borders, but personally unwilling to serve and condemning Busification.
And longer-term trends are forming.
A general observation made is that two broad megatrends are gradually taking shape about the country's future. These might become clearer after the conflict ends.
What are these trends?
One seems to favor eternal confrontation with Russia pursuing, retaliating. The other leans towards peaceful coexistence if possible.
Peaceful coexistence meaning?
Not necessarily being pro-Russian or friendly, but wanting to sort of wall off from Russia, avoid provoking new conflict while still strengthening defenses against future invasion.
But these aren't political parties yet.
The sources note that for these trends to become actual parties, the conflict probably needs to end. While it's ongoing, political discussion on this is apparently limited. Public disagreement often shows up as those TCC conflicts or people trying to leave the country.
And we might not even know the true public mood.
That's a comment included. Unofficial talks with sociologists reportedly suggest huge numbers refuse surveys, 80% face-to-face, 9 out of 10 phone calls. So their real views, their electoral preferences, largely unknown.
What about attitudes towards soldiers changing over time? Bondarenko mentioned this.
Yes, he suggests current feelings might mean public attitude towards people in uniform could shift, potentially worsen after the conflict, especially if some military personnel get involved in crime, like reportedly happened after other wars.
So betting on military figures in politics might be risky.
That's the view presented. Those avoiding service today will likely watch military figures entering politics carefully. They might doubt a revenge party, fearing new conflict, and be more likely to vote for candidates advocating for a reliable peace.
It's clear from these sources that the situation involves multiple complex and interconnected dimensions, doesn't it? From the very personal experience of mobilization, its societal impact.
Right, all the way to the specific movements on the battlefield, the consequences, and then these really intricate layers of international negotiation attempts and, well, geopolitical strategies.
It certainly highlights the varied pressures and perspectives at play, at least according to the information we've looked at here.
Absolutely. Looking at those reported domestic tensions, the challenges with mobilization and how that intersects with the military picture and the different international approaches, it really makes you consider the difficult path forward, regardless of how things unfold.
Thinking about those potential future societal trends you mentioned, that unknown depth of public sentiment, and how attitudes toward people in uniform might evolve, it does raise a powerful question, doesn't it? How might the long-term social and political landscape be fundamentally reshaped by the stresses and choices being made today in ways we just can't fully grasp yet?
Subscribe to our podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube. We are here to make things clear. New episodes every day.